And we're live. Hello, Virtual Horror Con. I'm Natalie Pudim from Charm Person Games. I'm very excited to be hosting the first panel of Virtual Horror Con, Episodic Gaming, Escaping the Horror of Scheduling Sessions. We've got a bunch of panelists I'm really excited to talk to today, so we'll go around and do introductions. Chris, if you want to start us off.
Sure. I'm Chris Handley from Darker Days Radio. I'm one of the hosts that's based in the UK. And other than hosting Darker Days Radio, which is focused on Chronicles of Darkness and World of Darkness and horror RPGs, I also write for all three of the Warhammer RPGs currently.
Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Allen. I am the other half of Charm Person Games. We are a queer women-owned professional game master service for hire based out of Baltimore. And we came into Episodic Gaming because Natalie and I host a women and non-binary D&D group that's episodic, meets every other week.
Steffi.
Hi, I'm Steffi. I write for the World of Darkness, Chronicles of Darkness, some Cthulhu stuff, and I wrote an indie game called We Die Here, which is actually geared to episodic gaming. So I'm very excited to be here.
And Joshua?
Hey everyone, I'm Joshua Doetsch. I write for Chronicles of Darkness, World of Darkness, Scarred Lands, as well as some video games like Conan, or Age of Conan, The Secret World, and I'm happy to be here.
Does anyone want to start us off by talking about what we mean when we say episodic gaming? I'm sure there's some people who are watching who are like, I don't know what this means, but it's the first panel of the con. I'm sure I'll watch. Does anyone want to talk about it a little bit?
I can get it started.
Great, please.
So like I said, Natalie and I host a bi-weekly women and non-binary D&D group. And Natalie came up with this idea, which she called episodic gaming, drop in, drop out. So every adventure is self-contained. You start and end in the same session. You show up, we're all members of the same guild, we're given a job, we go out, do the job, and then we come home, and then the adventure ends. So the idea is that if you can't make it to one session, that's okay, because the next time you come, you haven't, completely missed huge elements of the plot. Your character's not stranded out somewhere. You're not like waking up on the ship or something like that.
Does anyone else have anything they want to add to that? Any things that they feel are very core and integral to what episodic gaming is or means?
I would say I think episodic gaming requires, maybe compared to like how possibly some people run games, requires thinking in a bit more structure, because as I say, you need to have defined start, middle, and end. And if you think in that way, it changes also how you write for your games, because you want to try and tell the story in a nice, compact manner. You're aware you can't go off on wild tangents all the time like you may do in a more sandboxy kind of gameplay.
Yeah, I find that absolutely true in the episodic games I run. Steffi, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I wanted to say that what I used to do with my gaming group was we did episodes, but we did tie them into a larger season, because it was the same group, but different people in that group. So your idea was that you could get in and out as you wanted to per episode, but there would still be a big seasonal plot that everyone could partake in, even if they missed a couple of episodes.
The way I pitch it to a lot of people who don't know what we're getting into is I'm like, have you seen Buffy? Sometimes Spike just isn't in an episode.
Yeah,
exactly.
But he still exists in the show when he's not on screen. So that's what happens when your character isn't there. Your character is just off on another adventure, doing something else, and then your character pops back in and gets refreshed. And we've actually found that we split our episodes into seasons, so that there's new drop-in points for players as we go. And that's really good. Sorry, my cat gets very talking to the TV and is going to probably be a pain this entire panel.
The other thing I was going to say, because you brought up a good point about the Buffy, and obviously you could say things like Supernatural or any modern TV like that, or if we want to go for the classic, let's go for the seminal work of Babylon 5. It also allows you, if you think in that way, and you know who's going to be at your sessions because you've done your planning, your scheduling with your players, you can think a little bit harder, so that you can perhaps take plot lines from, as Steffi said, from your grander arc, and you can showcase or highlight either particular themes or put the spotlight more on one particular character out of the party.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And what I also love about it is that sometimes you get odd teams, like, you know, if so going back to Buffy, like, I would absolutely want to see an episode where Willow, Cordelia, and Reformed Spike are trying to tackle a problem together. Because I think that would be hilarious, but obviously there are some gaps in that team.
Yeah, as a game master, you kind of need to be able to pivot because you're going to have different dynamics each episode. But yeah, looking at it like a TV show that's ensemble, or like a soap opera where characters wander in and out, is definitely a good place to start.
So,
sorry, go on. No, it's all right. My point is pointless. It's all right.
I'm curious how each of you kind of arrived at episodic gaming, because, like I said, it doesn't seem like there's sort of a central place where people are talking about this as a way to structure campaigns. I mean, all the Dungeons and Dragons memes you see on the internet talk about how, like, Dungeons and Dragons is a great idea, but how do you get 5 adults to schedule time in their life to meet together? So how did each of you kind of arrive at episodic gaming?
So for me, it wasn't actually it was the schedule, but what it mostly was that we have a semi-steady group. And I was, for a very long time, the designated DM. And after a while, I just didn't want to anymore. So I tried to get people to step in and be the storyteller. And they didn't want to either. So finally, we just compromised, like, everyone is going to take 1 episode. And then it's off to the next person who's going to do 1 episode, and we're going to rotate. And that is actually how I rolled into it. So it also solved the problem of scheduling quite nicely. But the reason that we originally came into it is because we didn't have anyone who was willing to be the full-time steady DM at that point.
Right.
I think I got into. I think I started structuring my campaigns, my chronicles, that way. I think the moment Vampire the Requiem First Edition came out and I started running it, and I think it was really just because I wanted to emulate, serialized TV where episodes were self-contained and yet part of larger arcs. And I think it just felt more interesting being able to, within the space of a session or maybe 2, tell a very complete story that was also part of a larger thing. And I think that helped focus also players' attentions on the then and now of that story, rather than just always, as I say, going off on tangents and talking about, I'm at whatever and I want to go to the shop at whatever town and look for all plethora of weapons. She's like, this really isn't important to the story. I think it just helps with focusing. So I think there's some pros and cons to it, and that was the reason I went for it.
One thing I really like to do in my episodic adventures is start the party on the way to what they're doing. Like, start them on the airship.
In media res,
where they're going, and be like, you were sent to go do this. You're already on the ship on the way there. And that cuts off all the, like, we're going to go around town and meet the bartenders, and which is something I love about D&D sometimes, but it's, sometimes it's nice to cut it out and do, like, a more structured story.
Yeah, we started doing it because we wanted to play D&D, and Natalie and I both happened to be new to the city. That's how I met her. Actually, was doing this D&D thing. She posted about it on Reddit and shared up, and she didn't know anybody in the city. I didn't really know anybody in the city, and we wanted to play D&D. And it's really hard to get people together online to actually commit to coming to something in person. So she had this brilliant idea of, it's the same place, the same time on this every other week schedule. And if you can make it, awesome. And if you can't, that's okay. You'll be back next time. So it was trying to solve that problem of getting those 5 adults. In our case, it's more like 35 to 50 people to show up. And, we get anywhere from 3 people showing up to 12 people showing up on one session to the next. And it just really helps to solve that, like, can you come or can't you?
And one really neat thing we've been able to do as a result of that is, if we have more people than one game master can handle, we actually split into 2 parties telling episodes concurrently, so that people can hop between like what party they are in each week and try out different game masters and have different stories for their characters as they go through.
Yeah, we ran into like similar problems as everyone's mentioned. I reconnected with some of my oldest gaming friends from back in high school. We all played online. We played this big, sweeping, epic D&D game with emotional arcs and this and that. But we kept getting more and more players because we wanted to include everyone. We'd get friends that had never played before, and so we ran into the 2 problems of just too many players per game, and that just multiplied the possibility that someone was going to miss, and it was the kind of campaign that you couldn't really play the adventure without like that key person there. So we've switched over. We recently got the Acquisitions Incorporated book, which takes a campaign where you play as part of this a franchise of a giant corporation of heroes, lots of corporate humor, and we're playing a franchise. And the players that play the most often have made the franchise founder characters, which sometimes act as NPCs, sometimes go on adventures with the rest of the characters, but everyone else can make as many interns as they want. And every adventure, it's just picking a weird combination of these interns and that franchisee. And if there's any references that the interns don't get, it's kind of built into the humor of it. They look at these strange franchisee characters, and sometimes the interns don't survive, and that's okay.
I think another thing too that I was really trying to do when I came to Episodic Gaming was, especially for creative community, I really wanted it to be new player friendly. A lot of like people who'd never played D&D before to be able to come in and try it. But a lot of those people are working retail, so don't have a regular day off every week, or are dealing with kids and can't get their partner to watch the kids every single time. So it really allows people to do. We've had a lot of players drop in for like exactly 1 session to be able to be like, I want to see what this Dungeons and Dragons I hear is about. And they have a good time and they're like, that was fun. Probably won't do it again, but thank you so much. And other people who just could not commit to a regular session, who come once a month or once every other month. And it's great to see them when they show up. And yeah, it was really trying to remove the rough edges of role-playing games, like get rid of all the things that normally keep people from being able to join in on them and bring them in. So we've talked a lot about the pros of episodic gaming. Has anyone run into any like particular challenges in running episodic gaming and want to talk about how they solve them?
Well, I do like my big bads at the end. And if you do episodes, you do want everyone to be invested. You don't want anyone to end up at the big showdown and be like, why am I here? What are we doing? How do we get here? So that does mean that you have to carefully, plan which episode brings which information. And what I also found is I run a Vampire Los Angeles campaign, which is fairly episodic due to the fact that no one can ever make it together at the same time. So that's episodic. But what will sometimes happen is that I will write the episode like, oh, so this happened last month, so it makes sense that this would happen this month. And then that one player that one character that I needed to introduce that plot can't make it that month, which is, the nature of it. But it's like, oh, I really wanted to do that, but I can't because it's kind of tied to this character. And this character can't make it, and then I have to rearrange my episodes, which isn't a huge hassle, but it's a thing.
It's kind of like project management in software design, because you reach bottlenecks and relying on other people to move things on is what you would call in software design as blockers. Just because I'm in that field, but yeah, I think that's where it leads you to think quite heavily about what I call the chronicle calendar, where you have in your head a calendar of what events you want to have happen, and the way I design it is the way that, assuming the players don't interact with the plot whatsoever, this is what's going to happen. So it allows you to that the setting feels organic and responsive to the players, but also keeps moving if the players don't interact with things. But also then in Steffie's case, you could possibly then pick out, well, that player, I need that in there. The player wasn't here, so you can see how to shuffle things round and keep the plot going on the grand scale.
Yeah, we've run into that a lot. Our game tends to have a lot of a lot of religious conflict, to put it lightly. Lots of politics revolving around different religions, and we have 4 or 5 players who are playing like paladins or clerics of all the different gods.
Yeah,
and it's like, oh well, I've written this adventure around this holy temple, so if this player shows up this week, I want them. No, I want them in my campaign because I wrote a thing. You know, it's the big con is not knowing who's going to show up. You don't know who's going to show up, and if your game is going to work for that party balance. If that character you really hoped was going to be the linchpin is going to be there. If that character you gave a plot-heavy magic item to was coming every single week for 6 months and now hasn't come in 3 months, is that going to come up again? I don't know. I don't know how to work that in, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and along with party dynamic, you got to be really flexible with just the player dynamics. If you have rotating players coming in, because if you have a focus group, you might know like this kind of humor is okay, this kind of horror isn't. This is the quiet player I need to make sure is able to get the spotlight every once in a while. But when you have players cycling in, you got to be able to kind of pivot and go, okay, with this dynamic, that's all changing. I haven't run into too many problems with that, but I think it's forced us to be more communicative in between games and just before games.
Yeah, I have the luxury of playing with the same group as their exact who can make it changes, but it's the same people and I know them very well. We've been playing together for 20 years, I think. But I would imagine, especially if you're playing a horror game and you're doing episodes and you have new people coming in, that the whole lines and veils and the session 0 stuff of what is okay and what isn't, you have to keep doing that if you've got new players. So that's something that I don't have, but I would imagine that is tricky if you're doing horror games specifically. But
you call that a con, but also in some respects that's a pro because you have to be constantly aware of it.
That's true.
It means you don't become subconsciously unaware that you're breaking your rules of lines and veils and safe gameplay, which is then useful if you then go out into the wider world and you take your home game experience and what you do at your home game and instead run a game at convention. So, it has a silver lining to it that you have to be more aware of what you're doing.
It promotes some good habits, definitely.
It's more work, but it's good work to do. Yeah, that's true.
And just having more flexibility as a DM or GM in general is good too.
And what I would do is I let my players take downtime actions in between episodes. The characters take downtime actions, not the players.
The classic blue booking.
Yeah. But
could you give us an example of what that would be? Like what kind of thing?
So they end the episode with a clue, and then one of them in between 2 episodes will research it or call their contacts or try to buy a weapon. Things that I don't want to do in the session because it's not that interesting for the rest of the cast to watch. So I'll let them do that in between sessions. But what sometimes happens is that, they find a clue and one of the players takes off with it in the downtime. So they find out what it means and who's involved. And then next session that's relevant and that character isn't there. So it's like, one of you actually knows what's going on. However, did he tell the rest of you?
Yeah. I was just thinking, because it's relevant to a game obviously I've written for, and it's interesting because it does fit into how you can do episodic gaming, is you could look at the same grand plot narrative that you're doing, but from different angles. So you're not just playing the same group with the participants switching in and out. You're actually looking at the same setting, but from a different perspective with a different group. So the example of this that's actually published is the campaign book Dark Tides, which is for Wrath and Glory. So there's a scenario where you're playing the cadre who's been sent in by a rogue trader. There's another bit where you're playing, I think, more inquisitional cadre, a bit higher level, again, investigating on the same planet in the same city. But then there's a later scenario where you're actually playing a group of Eldari, who are space elves. Let's be honest, it's Games Workshop, it's space elves. But you're playing Eldari, but they're interacting with the same core plot and things that way. So you can therefore totally pivot and look at it from a different perspective with different players, and their enjoyment of the setting, the enjoyment of knowing they're part of this grander plot is not does not depend upon having participated in any of the other sessions and games.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Another thing I've found is a challenge for episodic gaming is getting players to have buy-in kind of toward it when it's something they're like, yeah, I missed a week, I guess I won't go back. Can be difficult to get people to like kind of motivate them to be like, we would like you to come back if it works for your schedule. And one thing we've done is start giving in-game rewards to things that like build their character outside. So if you commission a piece of art of your character, or make a piece of art, or make a Spotify playlist based on your character, or write a piece of fiction about your character, you get a little bit of in-game experience that'll push you toward the next level. And that kind of just lets people like get more invested in their character, which I think makes them keep coming back because they get attached to their own character.
Cool. Yeah, another thing we do in that regard is the levels just happen all at the same time. It's you don't get punished for missing a session. So you might come back and go, "Oh, I really want to play. I haven't played for 2 levels. I got some really nice goodies."
Yeah. See what we do. You get experience every time you level up, and we do like level 1 to 5 very fast. It's like 1 level per session up to level 5, and then it's 1 level every other session from there on. But we do a sort of HP balancing so that the monster that the level 6 cleric is fighting doesn't kill the level 1 ranger. So we kind of give them an HP bump when they come in, but it still lets the people who've been playing a while feel rewarded for having played for a while. And I don't like to give like level 1 characters a lot to brand new players. Sometimes it's like sitting behind the controls of like a spaceship and being like, what do all these buttons do? And starting at level 1 lets you be like, okay, I have, these 3 spells and I can attack with this weapon. And, instead of having 5 attacks a turn and spells and, special abilities.
Yeah, it's really different coming in with a new player because like I've been playing D&D since 2006. So like I did 3.5. I'm used to doing all these mathematical equations and I'm like, oh, it's fine. And then to have all these new players who like are like, what is a class? Like, what does that mean? It's really like to pull you back and like to Natalie's point, be like, okay, let's really streamline you. I was against her idea of like, oh, you start at level 1. I'm like, level 3 is where all the good stuff happens. So you just start at 3 automatically. But no, she's a really good point with that. And like, that is a way that you can keep from overwhelming your players is to like, you've got 2 buttons. This is what they do. And then tomorrow, next week, you'll have a 3rd button kind of thing. It's really helpful to keep new people from being overwhelmed, especially because our group is for women and non-binary people who are just less likely to have ever been exposed to any kind of tabletop role-playing or role-playing games in general, and who are usually intimidated by groups. Like I know I've been to D&D meetups and I've been the only woman in a group of 15 people kind of thing. So we have a secondary aim of being a community group, and keeping from overwhelming people really facilitates that.
So what are some other things that you found invaluable in episodic gaming? Things you kind of came to like 5 sessions in and were like, oh, like maybe you figured out by accident and was like, I'm really glad I did this, or things that you started doing later and you can't imagine having done it before without it?
Well, one thing I do is I insist that somebody writes an either in character or out character report on what happened and mails it to everyone so that the people who aren't there still know what happened. And I'm fine if you do an out character report and you write like, this is secret, your character doesn't know that. That's fine. But I do, and it saves me having to do what happened last month, or sometimes if nobody can make it for a while, like Christmas is, just forget it. So, what happened 3 months ago? Well, here we go. We have the report that Joey wrote and that we can now all read. And it's sometimes hilarious that people go, did that happen? Yes, you were there. But that's one thing that I insist on. Like, somebody has to keep notes, and it can be in character. We did for one hunter type game, we did an in-character booklet that I actually still have. It's really detailed with pictures and drawings and notes, and everybody writing as their character would. So some people are like, why are they making me write this? And other people would like really contentious about what they were doing. And sometimes my vampire games does out of character reports, but that is the consistent thing that I found that I needed to have everyone on the same page when they came back.
Joshua, it seems like you had something as well.
I was going to say, it's been very useful to utilize the more experienced players as sort of as GMs themselves with a tighter sphere of control of their character to help welcome in other players. It's more organic if they're the ones helping highlight how cool the characters are of these new players, or figuring out a good way to be a foil or a supporting character in this and that. And the more experienced players tend to be okay with that because they've had their moments of glory. They can sit back and I think more easily enjoy someone in the spotlight helping push them kind of there. So as a GM, you're not alone. You've got your other players to utilize to help you kind of do that kind of thing.
One thing I've found to that effect is I have a few NPCs that are just party favorites. And just having like the experienced players get so excited when they get to meet up with this NPC, like the new players, it gets infectious and they like immediately love and trust this NPC.
Yeah. I would just say that, like, you know, an anthropomorphic mushroom is pretty great. Like, everyone loves Shroomy.
I was gonna add to Joshua's thing about experienced players is also new players, like you said, when you've got all these character options and trim it down so that it's very easy so they can get into the system and how it works. That's important, but also that you will have new players, especially if they're coming into role-play games in a very gamistic way where they're potentially overwhelmed by what they could do in the story and they're dithering and they're like, oh, they're trying to find the zero-sum kind of solution so they don't come out of it bad. It's always good to have a player that's just like, they're the plot hound and they just push forward no matter what. I have to say my partner's very good at just like, I'm so bored of this section of just dithering. Let's just get on with it. And in character just does something and is literally a match to the powder keg on so many things. But it gets the drama going. And but then I think on the opposite end of that is going back to what I said about the campaign calendar and knowing what your NPCs are doing, is you can, if you've got that laid out, you can also highlight the price of inaction, the price of dithering and stalling and not taking risks. So in some respects, you should try and show both the price of not taking the risk and also rewarding the risk. Like if the new players do take a risky action, they do come to some conclusion, kind of give it to them, because it makes them proud that they took the action. They went and found it and did something rather than just sitting there waiting for Gandalf to drop the plot on their lap.
Right.
Yeah, it's good for new players to see that, because we definitely had new players that would just like, they would get anxiety trying to figure out like that. They'd like, no, they didn't. And then they see another player just barge into something like, oh, okay, it's okay to do that and fail or succeed. Either way, in fact, if they fail, usually you get a better scene or a role-playing opportunity.
Speaking to what it sounds like the tone of your campaign is, Joshua, like one thing I found is making the campaign world just a little bit silly opens it up for the characters to make bigger mistakes and let it be funny, than making a world where everything is very dark and serious. And, I think there's ways to run an episodic game that way, but I think it would be particularly challenging with new players coming in too.
Yeah, I think you want to make failures or complications really dramatic and cool. In a horror game, that could just be you die horribly and they go, oh, wow, I went out in a blaze of glory. Yeah. This is great. And in a funny game, it's like, oh, that led to something really funny. Or just in role-playing wise, like if a power is affecting you and you're going crazy or your personality is changing or whatever, you have an opportunity to have a really shining role-playing moment because you failed the die roll.
maybe making it dire for the characters, but making sure that the players are kind of rewarded for taking their action. Like even if their player dies, you'd be like, okay, you've got to go home today because your character died. Like find a way to bring them back in with another character like right away, and make sure.
I was going to say on that, it's quite funny because in Warhammer Fantasy, there's a built-in system for this where when you build a human character, because humans are just like you die like droves in that game. Right. But if you build a human character, you also determine the fated way you're fated to die. So if you die in that particular way, you get an XP bonus on the next character you build, which is brilliant.
That's a cool mechanic, yeah.
It's so cool. It's very Warhammer. It's like, what have you put as your fated way to die? I die because I fall into a ditch that's like, and there's literally a centimeter of water, and I drown in it by some way, or some. You'd be as completely ridiculous. Or you die because a clown frightens you to death. You can do that, and it works.
Yeah, what I will sometimes do is when characters die, is I'll bring them back as NPCs. At one point, we were playing a Cthulhu-esque game, and they were in a haunted house, and it was very clear that the mirrors that they were finding were portals to another world. And eventually, they came to a full-length mirror, and there stood this creature who said, "Come to me." And one of the players was like, "I'm stepping into the mirror." Hold up! I'm going to warn you now, from me to you, the player. If you do that, there is no coming back from this. This is a one-way portal. You can make a new character, that's it. So he thought about it really hard because he liked that character. He wasn't ready with it. But he said, like, it is what my character is going to do. So there I go. I step into the mirror. So he did that. And we were all kind of emotional because we liked that character and we thought it was brave of him to make that decision to say, I'm going to do it, even if I, the player, don't want to give up this character. So it was kind of emotional. We cut the game a little shorter so that we could all like hug it out. And then later I contacted him. I was like, what I want to do is I want to bring you back under my control and you will be the envoy of Azathoth. And he was like, that is really, really great. So we did that.
That sounds really awesome.
Yeah. I think to your earlier point, Steffi, that you're right that like notes become even more crucial because I'm the kind of player who I always have like a thick notebook with me and I write down everything and then like all my inventory, like I write down funny quotes that people have said, and like I use summaries and all these things. But something that like I did not anticipate as a GM was how much more important it was to remember who was at each session, especially as we've had more and more players show up and we've been running dual sessions a lot, like ever since for months now. We've had to have 2 parties at a time every single session, and we keep encouraging people to go across, like play with different people they played last time, play with a different GM. And Natalie and I are running into an issue where we're like, oh crap, I don't remember who was at this event versus that event, like did these 2 players get along? I just like it should have been obvious, but you cannot have too many notes, and you need to make them freely available to each other. So like if you're running with another GM or you're switching off GM responsibilities, and you need to make like summaries, give them to your players as well. And I'm definitely going to steal your idea of making the players write it for me.
Yeah. One thing, I thought Stephanie was about to put me on blast for this, but I am someone who for a long time ran D&D off my head. Like I was like, I know the NPCs, like I make my own campaign world so I remember them. Like I've never run in Forgotten Realms or a built world because I can never remember the characters who matter or the places. So I build my own campaign worlds and I've always just had them in my head and remembered. And now I'm suddenly having to share GM responsibilities in my world and be like, oh, I guess I have to start learning how to write this down in a way that other people can read it. And that has been a real struggle for me.
Yeah, especially because if you tell me something verbally, I'm not going to remember it. It's gone. You have to write it down or I will not remember it. So it's been an interesting learning curve.
Yeah, and I think what Stephanie said about writing down which players show up is vital, because I remember at one point they were visiting, I think it was the Baron Isaac of Hollywood in Los Angeles. And I was like, yeah, he doesn't like you all, remember? And one of the players was like, I wasn't there for that. Okay, so he doesn't like any of them, but you can talk to him. And that actually made a difference at that point, but I had completely forgotten that play wasn't there for that fiasco.
another thing I found to be kind of invaluable in running these games, because I think you can do it in a role-playing game and make it okay, but I hate the kind of D&D trope of when a player can't make it and then they're there the next session. It's like, oh, they show up in the middle of this trail and suddenly this extra character is there. Is kind of having my players return to a home base and making that home base feel like home, like a place where they have a lot of familiar NPCs and people they can interact with. And I think that has been really important. So like in my world, our players are like live in the last city. I actually modeled my campaign world on the game Destiny, where you have like your home city and then go out on adventures and come back, was kind of the root of that campaign world I built. And having that sort of city that they could come back to that felt like theirs and was where they got their jobs and where they all could meet back up and reshuffle as parties each session was really useful. And I wonder if other people have found other ways to kind of achieve that same thing and have a traveling party.
We've done something similar where in the acquisitions game where we have our home company base and we return to that. And I think if you have little points like that help tie it in, when you have lots of rotating characters, it might be a location, a city, a nightclub, certain NPCs. In a lot of shows, in a lot of like soap opera kind of shows like that or ensemble pieces, sometimes the location is almost its own character, and that helps. That helps center things, even though lots of characters are coming in and out of it, and gives some bit of familiarity that the players like, even though the player or character base might be inconstant.
Yeah, I mean, same for like sci-fi games as well. Like the spaceship is its character in its own way, and you could literally just leave one character at the ship because either they're doing some research or they're doing their own little thing. It's quite an easy way to write a character out for an episode, as it were. Or the classic DS9, the character, the space station is the character in that sense as well.
Yeah. And then another thing I've found really useful is making sure that players kind of see the impact of their past adventures on the world, and being able to see like, oh, like mention passing down a burned down building that they burned down 5 sessions ago.
Yeah.
Make sure that, because I think there is a little more on rails, like Chris was talking about earlier, when you run kind of these episodic games, like you have to kind of have that structure you're moving them through, but making sure that players see reflections of their decision points in the world. Has anyone had certain points like that?
Yeah, go on, sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, in our game with the home base, we've got kind of the Batcave-esque, like trophy room where things collect. So new players can see something, even if they don't know the context, it still seems kind of cool. Like, oh, why is that there? And then another player might be, oh, let me tell you about the adventure.
I think the other thing which a way to think about how you can run episodic games where you kind of need to start from a point which narratively makes sense in your arc, and the end point is you have to give sometimes the illusion of choice. So you may be on rails, but there are many rails, but they still meet at the same endpoint there. Now, that doesn't mean the endpoint is written in stone, like this will happen in exactly this way, because often the point is about quality of endpoints. So you get to the end of the survival horror game scenario that you're playing, the episode that you're playing, but depending upon the route that you get through there, means you've got more or less ammunition, more or less injuries, and so forth. And so you've got to structure your thinking in that way. And I think actually going back to the fact that we've got 2 writers here for Onyx Path and writing some stuff as storytellers. Well, I think a good thing to look at is like the storyteller adventure system that makes you think in scenes and how those are structured together. Where you may have optional scenes or scenes that can be shifted around and how at what point they occur within the story.
Yeah, actually, I started writing my adventures in scenes when I was playing Exalted, because it's a very cinematic game, and I was thinking in scenes and I was writing it down in scenes. But I've been doing that ever since with every single game, because it works really well. Because you'll have scene 1 is the clue they find. Scene 2 is research, and I don't have to come up with how they do research. I just know that they've got a ask someone or hit a library or call in a favor or do a seance or whatever the players want to do. But I do know that scene 2 needs to be researched. So there is, and if you write it out like that in scenes, then yeah, it does actually help with giving them a lot of broad options while also going, so after this, scene 3 would be that the villain does something. So I find that helps well in giving them a lot of agency and choice, and while still making sure that at the end of the game, you're done.
So we spoke a little bit about, I know some of you are writers for games. Are there any systems you feel are, you said you've written one particularly for it, Steffi, but other systems that you feel like are very well suited to this sort of gameplay? Like I'm a huge fan of Monster Hearts for one. I don't think Monster Hearts would work for episodic because it's so based on like character strings and ties to each other that if a character wasn't there, it would be a huge loss to the storytelling. So are there some that people feel work particularly well?
Yeah, I think clocks from Powered by the Apocalypse games are quite good because they're a good way of tracking progress of your villains, what they're doing. And those clocks could be tied to actions that the players are doing or particular players. Or you've got a clock for a player that is tracking, I don't know, maybe they've got some curse that progresses. You're only going to progress that clock when the player is there because it's quite arbitrary in some respects. So I think clocks are quite useful for that. You see, I think in Blades in the Dark, I think utilize it quite a lot for like their heist style gameplay in that fantasy setting.
I think the systems that rely on like closed room kind of thing probably don't work as well, because we were talking a lot about you have to be able to provide some kind of narrative reason why people come and go for it to really like make sense to characters. So like there's a game called Witchfighter that I just read about and I am dying to run it. But the whole idea is that you're trapped in a town for 30 days. And it's not a game you can really complete in one day unless everyone wants to sit down for a 12-hour gaming session, which as a GM, I do not. But that's a system, for example, with this like tracking of time, 3 time slots a day for 30 days, that isn't going to work for episodic. So if your system is like that, or your narrative is based tightly around that idea of being in a closed space for a long period of time, that's not going to work for episodic gaming. But it should work pretty well for any other like less confined kind of game system, I think.
Well, as I've been talking, I can definitely recommend the Acquisitions Incorporated book. Yeah. It takes the often epic storyline of D&D and it makes it very episodic friendly because you have a reason you're all there. And we tell people this: make any character you want, but they have to have some reason why they're willing to just work and make the company a success. And it turns the play style very Shadowrun like, where each story is just, here's the gig, here's the reward, solve it somehow. And any kind of ongoing story is just kind of incidental between the characters and what they develop. I would say Vampire the Masquerade and Requiem work nicely for a soap opera kind of thing, because 5th edition Vampire, you might have to play around with the coterie making rules, because if you have characters wandering in and out, you either maybe a broader coterie or just maybe give them the extra couple coterie points for their own personal backgrounds, depending on the style of how you run it.
Yeah, group templates is definitely something that turns up in other games. Iron Kingdoms RPG uses it, so you have, whether they're members of the, what's it called, Ghostlight, who are like ghost hunters. So it means, you've got a way of integrating all the characters together, but you have still options within that limited scope of character options. So it also means then within the scope of the stories, you're saying that generally if a player's not there, you shouldn't have too many gaps in skill sets and so forth that create hurdles inadvertently due to players not being present.
Steffi, do you want to take a chance?
Yeah, I think I've got 2 in mind that would actually work well. I should say that I developed one of them. But one that would work well is Promethean by Onyx Path. It's you're a Promethean, which is a created entity, and it's painful to be created because the world doesn't like it. So you're on a quest to become human, and you do that by having as many different human experiences as possible. So what then happens in the game is that you do have like you have an ensemble cast, but you do have the central hero for that episode because they are the person going through a human experience for that episode. But that also means that you can have people drop off because they are currently, not there or working on their own human experiences and accumulating information that way. So that one, it does require a big overarching plot because mapping out the road from being created to being human is finicky. So you do need to sit down and map a big plot. But if you have a dedicated group with people dropping in and out, then that would work well. It wouldn't work well with a group where you've got new players coming in and out. But if you've got a steady group that changes composition, that would be a good one. And the one that I developed that will be, it's not out yet, but you can check Onyx Path for information on it, is Legend Lore. It's a D&D type game where you, Natalie, travel into the realm, or I, Steffie. And I would still be Steffie, but I would be a pixie bard with all of the personality traits of Steffie. But one thing that we ran across as we were writing it is, if that were to happen to me, I would just want to go home immediately because I've got people that I love and they're here. So in the GM tab that we set, you can absolutely do the thing where time is different and portals are somewhat easier to find. And you could use that for an episodic game if you wanted to simply have people who are not present, they're on Earth. Solved. Where are they? They're at home with their family. They're not here.
Good to pop in for a visit.
Yeah, exactly. They'll come back later.
One game that was actually where I first got my Game Master experience is Mutants and Masterminds. I think comic book stories particularly lend themselves to characters showing up every week. And then a game that I kickstarted recently that should be available to everyone, hopefully, that I'm very excited about is Pasión de las Pasiones, which is a game about Spanish language soap operas and telenovelas, which I think lends itself to sort of the episodic storytelling. So we are starting to run out of time. So real quick, starting with Chris, where can people find you?
Just look for @Darker Days Radio on Twitter or Darker Days Radio on Facebook, and www.darker-days.org for the podcast.
Stephanie?
You can find Natalie and I at charmpersongames.com. We are on Facebook as Charmperson Games. We're on Twitter as Charmperson Game because of character limits. But yeah, we're there.
Steffi?
I'm on Twitter as Steffie de Vaan. You can probably just find me like that, but my handle is 100, the number, 100 Things I Love. And if you go there, I've got a Patreon and a website. I've got all the links up on my Twitter, so just head on over there.
Great. And Joshua?
You can find me at Twitter at Joshua Doetsch. The odd spelling is on the screen, or joshuadoetsch.com. I also have a Patreon as well.
Okay. And I am at CharmPersonGame as well on Twitter. You can also follow me personally at Natalie_20 spelled out. So thank you so much for coming to this panel. I learned a bunch from it that I'm excited to use in future things, and I hope all of our audience did too. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.
See ya.
Pleasure.